Hello, guys, and welcome to another podcast episode. This is episode 9, and today we are here with Ben Strains. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not too bad, not too bad. Just to let the viewers know at home, RJ cannot make it tonight, but today we are interviewing Ben from Ben's Trains. He's got a really cool post-war layout, and so we're gonna ask him a couple questions about that today. So the first question, Ben, how did you get into it?
Well, the very first time I was ever around a model train was with my grandfather on his layout when I was, I believe, 3 years old. Was the first time I went to his train room in his old house, and most of what's in my collection is stuff that was his. So it's obviously stuff that's quite old. It's been used a lot, but still runs good for its age.
I would agree with you. Post-war does last a long time. I could say that I can make the argument personally myself that a lot of my post-war stuff has outperformed a lot of the NPC and early modern stuff, just because it was built to take apart and put back together. So you've obviously had a early exposure to model trains. So now that you've been collecting for a while now. Why do you still go to post-war?
Well, for one, it's cheaper. It's generally fairly easy to find. Uh, Obviously, it's very reliable, and it's stuff that I already have a bunch of, so I find no reason to need to change. It's even quite realistic for how old it is. Um, Obviously, the tubular track, which I use on my layout, is clearly not the most realistic thing, but it's I was talking to this about people before that you're not going to be looking at the track, it's the engines and the accessories, not the track. So I tend to find O gauge is still considered the most realistic of the model trains.
Yeah, and I definitely think, I've said this before multiple times, but the tubular track just works so well. It was built to last, honestly, and that's why I have it on my layout. I've always had problems with fast track, and I was just like, you know what, let's go back to the old stuff with the tubular, and it works like a charm. So,
Yeah,
oh, go
a
ahead.
lot of things on quite a few pieces on my layout are either very early post-war or late pre-war track.
Okay.
Some of these in right those two right there I know are from definitely a pre-war era, so because they're darker in color
Yeah.
and obviously a lot dirtier. No matter how much you clean them, they have like dirt is like permanently caked onto them.
Yeah, I have some post-war pieces as well that were from my grandfather's his collection, and then I have some brand new, uh, you know, tubular track that I picked off of Train World or Menards or whatnot, and the old stuff like the rusty track just runs just as well. It's kind of
Yeah.
fascinating, but so kind of tell us about your layout. Um, so kind of what do you got going on the layout?
Okay. Well, a lot of it is mostly post-war Plasticville. There's a bridge that I made myself. There's an American Flyer accessory, two of them actually. One's a crossing gate, the other's a switch tower. You got a siding with its little activator track next to the Plasticville Freight Depot. There's the illuminated station that I won from the Ours Trains giveaway that Corey did on his channel, and I went from 2 loops to 3 loops. Two of them are O gauge. The other two are, or the other one is O27. The other two are O gauge. Obviously, as you said, you can't see anything, but I just picked up the 675 K4
Yep,
a few
I saw
days
that
ago.
video.
That's on right here. There's my anniversary set. That was my grandfather's. I do have my first set on. But the recent changes I've done with it are obviously, I think, the best and the most kind of realistic. They're more involved. The main focused area, what I think, is when you kind of look at my layout from a certain angle, everything kind of gets funneled to the water tower, which is in the direct center of the layout, and just to the left of that is this like sort of construction site area that's kind of surrounding the siding. That's part of the main focus of my layout.
So a lot of people kind of know you as the Wizard of Postwar. Why? How come you know so much? Like when I was watching your video on the new K4, and you were like, "This train has Baldwin drivers." Like I don't even know what that is. So how do you know so much about a lot of these post-war items?
A lot of it comes either from other YouTube videos or from, I have tons of those old Lionel guides, and that tells a lot of that information itself. But part of it is also from other people's YouTube channels and watching the content that they put out about some similar stuff. Like with how the Baldwin drivers, they have a different like design on the wheels, and they have silver around them, like the chrome plates on the outer edges of the wheel
Okay.
that make the wheels stand out, rather than the later versions that just had the plain ones.
Okay. Okay, cool. So, can I ask you a little bit about your engine roster and kind of what you have going on there?
For the most part, it's mostly diesel, but I think I have a pretty good balance of steam and diesel, I'd say, and I personally would prefer. Now, obviously, I like all engines post-war, but I would probably prefer the post-war diesels, because they tend to pull slightly better than the steam engines. I believe that has something to do with the fact that their weight is concentrated lower rather than up high, because the steam engines have like the die-cast shells, so they're more top-heavy. Whereas the diesels have plastic shells, and the at least for the earlier ones, have steel like frames and chassis that are much heavier.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's all post-war with the exception of 3 that are MPC modern era. The newest locomotive I have is from 2008, and then there's one from 1993, and
Okay.
then one from the 70s. The rest is all post-war and pre-war too.
Okay.
I have some.
All right, so that's a pretty cool roster bin. You got a nice collection of post-war and pre-war items there. So you're on YouTube now. You kind of want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Now, obviously, the whole reason I got into the whole YouTube thing is actually quite funny, because it wasn't that I ever really wanted to be a YouTuber. It was actually when I first got my phone, because I had a YouTube channel several years ago, and the problem was the phone that I had then did not seem to want to upload YouTube videos at all. Like, I think I recorded a total of like 19 videos, but only like 3 of them uploaded. But then I got my new phone, and I wanted to see if I could upload a video of me running a train. It was back when it was still on the carpet. before I put it up on the layout. And it actually worked, so I figured, you know what? I've been wanting to kind of make at least a somewhat successful YouTube channel rather than getting like 4 or 5 subscribers or however many I had last time. So I went ahead with just kind of uploading more and more videos until I kind of got to where I am today.
I definitely think you've made a lot of progress coming up. I believe you were on the GFW stream as well.
Yes.
Yes.
That's, I think, a month ago, and a
Okay.
half, 2 months
Okay.
at this point.
Well, if any of the audience is interested, I will link Ben's channel in the description below. So go check him out if you love everything post-war. It's really cool. So you said when you started your YouTube channel, you started on the carpet with just a loop of track and a transformer. So do you kind of want to talk about how you built your layout?
Yeah, the first layout that I ever had was actually just it was these 3 plastic shelves that were like 2 feet high with a hollow door laid on it. And it was obviously a hollow door, so as you imagine, it was more noisy. Plus, on top of that, I used Fast Track, which was like the most annoying layout
Oh my
ever.
goodness, yeah,
Fast
definitely.
Track with hollow doors under it. Plus a bunch of I only had like 3 or 4 engines at that point, and they were one's from my grandfather, one was my first set, and obviously at that time they hadn't been like serviced or lubricated or anything.
Oh yeah.
So the engines themselves were super loud and noisy anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really loud layout. The layout I have now is 4x8.
Okay.
The old one was 3x7 about. So it gained about 2 feet in size total.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quieter. I put up ways to kind of lessen some of the vibrations and whatnot.
How did you do that? Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah, that's okay. This layout it's rubber ties, rubber pieces under the ties, and foam pads kind of like stapled up underneath to limit some of the vibrations. And the other things with this one is it's obviously a lot sturdier because it's plywood instead of a hollow door.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on top of bench work. So this layout, if you've seen in my videos, there's a light hanging above the layout.
Yep.
And if I need to ever turn the light off, it'll turn off with the light switch, but if I ever like want the lights on but the layout light off, it might not be the most convenient thing, but the best way to do it is to obviously get up on the table and turn it off. So this table is strong enough to support the weight of a person on it. So it's a lot stronger than the old one. It's also a lot taller and bigger. And instead of 1 loop, it has gone up to 3.
Okay. I'm surprised you can fit 3 loops on a 4x8. I have 036 on the outer loop and 027 on the inner loop. And with scenery and everything, it's a tight fit. So, but you just have a lot of buildings, so and you have.
What I used with mine is 042 on the outer.
Okay. Gives
you more space in between 2 of the rails. Then I used 031, and then it's 027.
Okay.
So it's more limited on the inner loop, but it does fit, and there's a decent amount of space between the rails. So.
Yeah, you even said you had like a passenger station and a yard. So I mean, the functionality there on that layout is still.
Yeah, it's pretty packed, but it's a good amount for what the space is.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask you kind of a fun question. If money wasn't a problem, and you could just get any post-war engine tomorrow, what would it be and why?
probably be the 773 Hudson from 1950.
Okay.
Because, I mean, it's a very kind of, like, iconic engine.
Oh, definitely.
And it's also it's obviously the biggest Hudson. It's the biggest steam engine made in the post-war era, and definitely the most desirable, other than probably like the 746,
Okay.
which
Okay.
was the big J-class one.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think those pieces that you brought up were very influential in Lionel's history, just because with all that new detail and everything like that.
Yeah. Well, because that's what they always talk about, saying how, like, Lionel's very expensive and,
Mm-hmm.
like other companies that are like the same thing but cheaper, that are so much better. Which, honestly, if it weren't for Lionel making locomotives like that 700E that they made in the pre-war era, that was scale
Mm-hmm.
and all that, and then they made the 773 as just like a updated version of it.
Yeah.
And there was like big engines like the GG1s, the FM Trainmasters, and Lionel even invented HO too. Like, if it wasn't for post-war Lionel inventing all that stuff and producing it and selling it as sets, then Lionel wouldn't have what it has today.
Yep. I would definitely agree there. And I think another thing too, I was actually researching for a video that I'm working on. And so I actually found out, I think it's called the electronic control set. So Lionel made a train set it came with a turbine and a couple freight cars and a caboose and some loop of track. And it included this electronic control set, which allowed you to uncouple anywhere on the layout. Like, you didn't have to have a piece or anything. You could do it anywhere on the layout, and I thought that was really cool. And it wasn't really a huge hit for some reason, but it was definitely an advance in technology for that time as well.
Yeah.
The post.
Well, it's
Oh, go ahead.
the one thing that I've heard people kind of talking about before is as to why Lionel won't make Magna Traction anymore, is because, I mean, for one, it's harder to make steel rails, it's more expensive, but they say it's because the Magna Traction can interfere with some of the electronic systems
Interesting.
in the engines, which is, to me, doesn't make as much sense, because if they could do it in the 50s with like the old-timey technology, they should be able to come up with a way to make it effective now.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like we were talking about this on the Discord the other day, actually, like how ever since, like, when the original Lionel company closed in 1969, that, like, Lionel has, like, never been the same since, and they've always just done things differently for one reason or the other, and they never decided to, like, go back to that old style of trains that made them famous in the first place.
Interesting. I haven't really heard that. Could you go into that more?
With the Magna Traction, well, it was a thing that, like, apparently the Magna Traction, for whatever reason, that it's kind of just a rumor that I heard from various places, where people say, like, Lionel doesn't want to because, like, it's more expensive to make steel track, and they don't want to, like, it's obviously gotta buy all the magnets and stuff. And obviously engines now are way bigger than they were before.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's gonna take more magnets to make it as effective. And with like the electronics, like the circuit boards and such inside of them, it's gonna be the magnets supposedly interfere with those circuit boards to for some reason, but most people just say that's a lie, because if they could do it in the 50s, which obviously I know like they didn't have like the circuit board and stuff in them, but if they could pull it off, then it won't mess with like the whistle and the motor.
No.
Then
Yeah.
then the modern companies should be able to come up with something to some degree to kind of bring back the Magna Traction.
Yeah. Maybe you could invent that, Ben. You could experiment and try some things out yourself and see if you could get anywhere. But it would be definitely very hard to fit Magna Traction or something to that degree in like a big boy or something like that per se.
It also, I believe it must have something to do with some of the ways that the the newer trains are kind of like they're built a lot differently. Like you take apart an Alco from like 1952,
Yep.
and then you take one apart like mine, for example, from like 1993, and they're entirely different on the inside.
Oh
The
yeah.
one from 1993, even though it's a more heavy-duty locomotive per se, it's based a lot like the cheaper Alcos, like the Texas Specials,
Mm-hmm.
for example. Because it just kind of goes to show like how cheap it is that they're making things nowadays, because
Yeah.
the nicer engines are more like the cheap ones from the post-war era.
Mm-hmm.
And you could kind of see why it would be a bit tougher to incorporate Magna Traction with the way that the new engines are kind of designed and built.
Mm-hmm. You were kind of talking about, fitting Magna Traction in these trains and stuff like that. Why do even the new engines pique your interest at all?
For the most part, no. None
Interesting.
of the larger like scale engines really kind of like, none of them catch my eye. It's some of the NPC era ones, like like there's the Crescent Limited, the Southern Pacific Daylight,
Yep.
the Blue Comet,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds like that. But none of the like, I don't like walk into a train store and see a, say like a scale like cab forward or something and be like, oh, that's something I gotta have. I tend to stay away from the more modern ones, and I said this earlier too, that like, because the modern ones are much more expensive and much less of a toy.
Yeah.
Because honestly, the whole reason I'm in the hobby is not really because I'm trying to make something realistic. It's because you're essentially just playing with trains. Is what you're doing when you have post-war stuff and you have a layout like mine. You're essentially just collecting them to play with the trains initially.
That.
And whereas like with the new ones, they don't make like the same kinds of like accessories and whatnot like they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Like the best you get is probably like those conventional classic sets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons when I started collecting, I got a ready to run Hogwarts Express starter set. But I mean, like I've said before in previous podcasts, you know, I was initially exposed to trains from my grandfather's collection. We had some that we would get out during Christmas and we'd run them, and they'd be like, kind of like you said, like the Southern Pacific Daylight NPC era, some kind of engine like that, something similar, and stuff like that. And so I was exposed to a lot of the conventional tubular track, forward and reverse, whistle and bell, and that was about it. And when I started collecting, that's what I'd go for. A lot of my, like, for example, my second engine I ever bought was a MPC era, I think it's a GP7 New York Central. It literally goes forward and backwards, and it has a horn. But to me, when I started collecting, that was like the coolest thing ever. And now that I've kind of experimented a little bit, with Lion Chief and that newer control. I mean, I still really enjoy just throwing on the transformer and watching my turbine go in loops for hours. I mean, I do like the new stuff. I definitely think it's cool, but I definitely see where you're coming from with the aspect of, it's just a toy, and at the end of the day, you need to run it. I definitely see where you're coming from there, but I mean, as I said in the live stream, I'm kind of interested in that Legacy 460. I've never really had a Legacy engine or anything that super fancy at all, but I definitely get where you're coming from with the the cheaper. I don't want to use cheaper as like a degrading term, but like less expensive engines that still look good and still run really well.
And that'll last longer. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, we always say, like, the Postwar ones will probably still last longer than the modern ones, but honestly, you never know. They might last a good 20 years or so, but, I mean, you gotta think, most of the Postwar ones, even those, like, plastic-motored Scout engines that are known for being, like, the worst
Yeah.
engines ever, still run to this day, so...
Yep.
Just no one knows how long the new stuff will last. I think we usually just say that because a lot of people that have them usually have problems with them after a few years.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
some people have better luck than others.
Yeah. I think that's part of the hobby too. Some people have better luck than others. But with that Scout you were saying before, when I started collecting, I wanted to learn how to take apart an engine. And so I was like, what's the cheapest train that I could find? And so I found a lot of results, and a lot of those were Scout engines. But a lot of people were saying don't get those because they're so cheap. So I ended up getting a NPC era 442 locomotive. I took it apart, cleaned it, put it back together. She ran like new. I still need to work on the whistle in the tender, but she runs.
Yeah, that's the first engine I ever really fixed up was the pre-war juniors that I have.
Okay.
That was the first engine that I ever technically rebuilt. All I really did was bypass the E unit and replace the brush contactors because it needed those severely to be replaced. Because, like I said, it was the Lionel Juniors, and those were made in the Great Depression, so...
Okay.
Obviously, they're not meant to grate, but it was what you got back then, so...
Yeah, and definitely in times like those, you couldn't ask for anything better,
Yeah, you'd be lucky to have one that was you got it right before or something. If you got a nicer set, you could have those ones or something. But some people, that was their starter set, and they had to deal with it on their...
Yeah.
A lot of those sets sold for $3.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in 1930s, which is only $15 today, so it's still cheap.
Yeah. To me personally, it's crazy to see Lionel, survive the Great Depression, World War II.
They had to buy Ives to do it, actually. They bought Ives during the Great Depression, which helped sustain their company, and then they bought American Flyer during World War II.
Okay.
They survived. They during World War II, I believe, was actually Lionel actually made stuff for the military. They sent their stuff to the military. In the Great Depression, they just kind of bought Ives, and they did their best to keep themselves open. But I think when Lionel bought Ives pretty much just decided to close, because there was no way they would be able to... they were in Lionel's shadow, pretty much. There's no way they'd be able to keep up with them.
Yeah.
Because then you got to 1950, which I learned about this, and made me laugh, that in 1950, it was either 1950 or 1940, I think, that Lionel was making so much money, but with all that money they were making, they had to put it back into making train sets, and the catalog that they released that year had to be in black and white because they were literally spending all their money to make sets because so many people wanted them that they couldn't afford to color the catalogs. So they just had to make the catalogs black and white.
Interesting. I've never heard that before, or heard that aspect of it. But again, I think those catalogs were definitely a crucial piece in Lionel advertising. A lot of those pictures are still seen today, and still strike the hearts of a lot of collectors who lived during that time frame.
From what I understand, actually, a lot of the newer Lionel catalogs, if you really kind of look at them, they're actually kind of based off the old catalogs. Like some of the poster pictures and stuff that are like on the front of them are very similar. Some are like identical to the old ones. They just like replace it with a modern engine instead of it being like an old like whatever, like 464 Hudson. It's a Union Pacific big boy instead or something like that.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Postwar Lionel has a lot of history behind it. From the Great Depression, World War II, even the Korean War, and kind of stuff like that. So Lionel has a very interesting history, but they're still with us today, and they're still making trains for us. So, all right, Ben. Well, thank you for coming on today.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Hey,
I enjoyed it.
Not a problem, dude.
Always happy to talk about model trains.
All right, I would love to talk post-war with you all day. It's a blast. So before we end things here, if you guys haven't already, go ahead. I will post Ben's channel in the description below. You guys got to go check it out. He's got an amazing post-war collection. Ben, do you have any closing thoughts for the audience today?
No, not really, other than if you're going for a model train, definitely pick O-gauge. It might be expensive, but it's definitely worth it. Even the new stuff that some might consider overpriced, it's definitely worth it. O-gauge is worth it. You get what you pay for.
I definitely feel like O-gauge is like the perfect size.
Yeah, well, it's easy for kids and adults.
Yep. Agreed. All right, Ben. Well, thank you for coming on today. Again, greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, well, no problem.
Yep. This has been the episode 9 of the Model Train Talk podcast. Go in the description below to check out Ben's channel, and we will see you guys in the next episode.